100 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Sid, you've had a haircut especially to celebrate, haven't you?
Well, and my shirt too.
Which I'm sure that those people listening on the audio-only version will really appreciate. So thank you. Can you believe it? When we started this weekly episode, it was we were right in the heart of the first lockdown in the UK, and we were bored. We had nothing to do, and we just thought, why not? Let's chew the cud, and let's turn on the camera and record us chewing the cud. Yeah. And here we are, 100 episodes later.
Here we are. It's been wonderful.
Great. Well, hopefully people are still enjoying it and still tuning in. Now, that's the happy bit of this week's episode over with.
That's it. That's the only happy bit.
Well,
we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the Ashes, and we're English, so...
Yeah, exactly. And we did a sort of almost like a mini post-mortem last week, didn't we? But we hadn't had the third ODI at that point. We now have had the third ODI, and to be honest, it didn't really go much better than the second or the first ODIs, did it?
No, England are very mortem. They're about as mortem as it's possible to be.
Okay, but there were a couple of changes to the team. Three, I think. So they brought in Tash Farrant and Freya Davies, didn't they? And they also, probably the most significant change potentially going into the World Cup was bringing Emma Lamb in to open instead of Lauren Winfield-Hill. Was that the right call, Sid? What did you make of that decision?
That's a really good question. I speculated going into the second ODI, by which time everything was basically lost, and I said there's nothing to be gained here, from the series itself. So I speculated that England might want to bring in Emma Lamb at that point. Obviously, that would be for Lauren Winfield-Hill. I should stress again, as I stressed last week, that I don't think that Lauren Winfield-Hill is the reason that England lost the Ashes. Nobody with the bat really performed as they would want to be throughout the entire series. But she was the person that was obviously going to make way for Emma Lamb. So I speculated about that. It didn't happen in the second ODI. Going into the third ODI, therefore, I actually didn't think they should do that, because I felt that that giving someone a try but only giving them one match, it's like throwing a lamb to the wolves, Raf. You see what I did there?
Very good, Sid. Well done.
Well, I mean,
we couldn't have our 100th episode pass without you making a stupid
terrible
pun.
dad joke.
Yeah.
So I thought it's quite tough going into that situation where you're going, here's a try, it's just one game.
Yeah.
And then look what happened. She faced 3 balls, didn't score any runs, and Lamb to the slaughter, unfortunately.
Got out to a good ball.
Yeah. Unless you read the BBC's report, oddly, which said it was a straight ball, and I went back and looked at it again, it didn't look very straight to me. It looked like an excellent ball. Credit to all of the Australian bowling, that they kept the pressure on England. This is not just a story of England having collapse with the bat again. Some great bowling, and none more so than those 3 balls that Perry bowled to Lamb, which ended in Lamb walking back to the pavilion on her first ODI, her first proper bat in a match. Of course, technically batted in her one T20 appearance, but didn't actually face the ball.
Yeah.
She was at the other end. So her first chance to actually face a ball in international cricket, and it's against Elise Perry, and not just Elise Perry, but a rampant Elise Perry that's obviously full of confidence, and an Australia team that for whom the Ashes were won, and this was the celebration party, if you like.
Yeah. You have to really feel for Emma Lamb, those 2 situations she's been.
And everyone was talking about we wanted to take a look at Emma Lamb, and it just feels.
Lisa,
yes. So Lisa said on when she was on that microphone thing at the side of the pitch.
Oh, you mean the bit where she said, "I've told them to really go out and go for it," when they'd literally been crawling along at one and over.
She said we wanted to take a look at Emma Lamb, and I just don't feel that's how you take a look at someone one game at the end of a series, when it never felt like England were going to get that consolation win. We've seen many times in the past that teams go off the boil if they've already won the series, and teams often get a consolation win in the fifth match, don't they?
Yeah.
Or the fifth match of a Test series, and in the men's game, or the third or fifth match at ODI. England did that in 2019, right? They won
the last T20.
Yeah. So
it was quite funny because England had won the match, and then they did the Ashes presentation at the end, and all the Australians were like, "Yay, we lost the match, but we won the series, haha." Anyway,
but it didn't feel like the Australians were going to let that happen this time. So really tough situation for Lamb to come into, and it didn't work out. I just really hope that she's given more opportunities. I'm sure she will be.
Okay. I think that England, I sort of reflected last week, but I think that England can take some positives from the bowling performances. I do think
absolutely,
that,
Raf.
I read something this week saying, Catherine Brunt was the best bowler. She was the leading wicket taker in the series, and that means that she shouldn't retire. She's been hinting at retirement for years, and her latest is that she's going to go after the Commonwealth Games. And
the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane.
But it's like, and saying, she can't retire now because England need her because she's their best bowler. And I just don't agree with that. I think that Catherine Brunt needs to think about Catherine Brunt, to be honest, rather than the team. She really needs to focus on her own health and how long can she keep doing this to her body.
Yeah, of course, they didn't think she was able to play the last two ODIs, and other players did play those matches.
Yeah, and that's the flip side of this, isn't it? Is that actually, in terms of being worried about England's bowling stocks, I'm not really. We only got to see a tiny bit of Tash Farrant this series. She's obviously the left arm option. I think Freya Davies bowled really well in the third ODI. I was so impressed with her control and really had Alyssa Healy totally beaten. She should have got her the first ball she bowled to her.
There was another ball that was basically the best ball ever bowled that didn't take a wicket.
Yeah, and then obviously she did eventually get Healy's wicket. And when you can bowl like that, I'm one of the best players in the world. I think that says a lot about somebody who really has been quite underused by England. And as well as that, we've also talked previously about Kate Cross. She's definitely got a few more years left and seems to be really kind of coming to the top of her game recently. And we haven't even seen Lauren Bell this series. She was in the squad for the Test and was kind of around for the ODIs, but wasn't used. I don't really need to talk about Lauren Bell that much because you've done it all for me in previous episodes, Sid. But she's the next big thing and a really exciting prospect for England. So I'm not really worried about when Catherine Brunt chooses to retire, to be honest.
Yeah, and Shrubsole as well looks back to her best. I mean, she's definitely she's bowling the best that she has since 2017, I think. So and that's not bad timing. So if it's funny, isn't it? It's just the batters now need to kind of keep up with the bowlers again. These things can go in quite quick cycles.
Yeah, and you wrote a piece for CRICKETher this week, Sid, that was sort of a little bit reflecting on that, but it was kind of overall what's England's team going to look like for the next Ashes down under, which will be, you thought was 2025, did you say?
Yeah, sort of 20 years, about 4 years' time, isn't it? So yeah, it was supposed to be a fun little piece, just bigging up some younger players. Unfortunately, it seemed to upset quite a lot of people, which I was myself a bit upset about, honestly, because I genuinely didn't mean to, have that reaction, and I felt a little bit sad that people had obviously read it and got upset about it. Obviously, the people that were upset were people that weren't mentioned, or felt that people that they favoured weren't mentioned. And I just named 11 players that could be in the squad next time we go down under in 4 years' time. And I focused very much on young players. I explicitly said I was going to ignore everybody that was going to be 30 or more in 4 years' time. But it did a kind of showed that we, there's definitely a core of a team, that will be available in 4 years' time, and we've got some young prospects coming through. But what we really need to do is make sure that that we give them the attention and the focus that they deserve, and the high quality cricket. And the big thing that I wanted people to take away from that piece actually was not so much even the talent; it was the focus on ensuring that these people get the high quality cricket that we need them to get, because these players aren't ready yet to take on Australia, and if they stand still, they won't be ready to take on Australia. Now, we've talked a lot about Alice Capsey, for example, and it's just one example, Capsey bingo ding, And we've said that Alice Capsey has the capability and the talent to be the best player in the world, but she's not going to be the best player in the world if she stays where she is. She needs to work hard for the next 4 years, and all of these other players do, and then they will be able to step up and challenge Australia. And we need to help by giving that as a game, but not us personally, but the teams need to help by giving them proper game time, giving them proper exposure in the 100. Not it needs to be people like Danny Gibson not batting down at 8 and maybe getting 1 or 2 overs in the entire competition. They need to be batting at 4 or 5 or bowling their full quota of balls. And I did make one slight suggestion that maybe we need to put in a playing condition in the 100 that actually forces this upon teams, that says if a player doesn't bat in the top 5, they must bowl their full quota of deliveries, and the other way round, if a player doesn't bowl, say, more than 5 deliveries, they must bat in the top 5, and that will ensure that it forces the team to not depend on their international all-round stars, but to give opportunities.
So that
to those.
playing condition will be in place just for your English players, would it?
I don't see why it wouldn't be in place for everybody, but effectively it would only apply to your English players.
Okay, I mean, I think that by doing that you might end up with people sitting on the sidelines rather than actually getting in the 11 potentially. And I also think that the ECB are really unlikely to introduce that playing condition because they see the 100 as their kind of shop window for women's cricket, and they want it to be the best quality therefore, and they might see that playing condition as compromising on that. Other than that, it's a great idea.
Well, I mean, the other option is just to lean on the sides to play these people more. But the simple truth is that it's going to be harder to lean on sides in the 100. We know that Mark Robinson, are we allowed to say this? Yeah, we probably are. Mark Robinson leaned on sides during the KSL.
Oh yeah, that's kind of common knowledge, isn't it?
To play people in particular positions.
Of course he did. He wasn't always successful.
A lot of the sides didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that Mark Robinson was in a much more influential position to lean on KSL sides than anybody is to lean on 100 sides.
Yeah.
So I just can't see Trevor Griffin taking a call from Lisa Kiteley going, can you bat Grace Scrivens higher up the order? And Trevor Griffin going, yeah, okay. He's just going to be like, well, no, I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
Well, and it's always been this thing of, do we actually, if you're Trevor Griffin, you want the Sunrisers to win.
Of course, yeah. So
that's not the
tough
100.
One.
That's the RHF and the Charlotte Edwards Cup, isn't it? But it's whatever the equivalent is.
Anyway, we digress.
London Spirit. Anyway, okay, so
Raf, thinking back to talking of Mark Robinson, thinking back to 2019, this Ashes series, we haven't had quite the kind of disaster that was Canterbury 2019, which of course was the first nail in the Mark Robinson coffin, if you like. That was the point at which it all started to go wrong for him, when ultimately led to him losing his job. And yet, the numbers are actually worse than 2019, and because we haven't won a game. Better or worse than 2019, in a word?
I think the numbers are actually the same, aren't they? Because of
the draws, they probably are. Sorry, but we haven't won a game this time. So better or worse? In a word, Raf.
In a word, better.
Okay.
Am I allowed to have more words now, or is that the end of it?
No, if it was just one word, that would make quite a boring CRICKETher weekly.
Okay, I'm going to say better.
Okay.
I have thought about this a lot. I think that we have been quite quick to forget the memory of the test, can I say, because the way in which England fought so hard on that 4th day to try and win the test was actually so exciting and better than any display that we saw from them in 2019. I also think that the way that Heather Knight batted in the test, yes, she was partly forced to do that because everyone around her was totally crumbling, so that's a bit of an indictment on the rest of the top order, but that innings is going to go down as one of the great innings in women's test cricket, and we didn't have anything like that in 2019, so there's that. And in terms of kind of just thinking overall, I think that winning the Ashes down under was always going to be a bigger ask this time around than trying to win them at home in 2019. And also I do think that our bowlers have performed better this time around. I think that generally in pretty much every match the bowlers have been good. And one of the things that people often forget about that match at Canterbury in 2019 is that even by the time that Elise Perry came out to bowl at the England batters, the match was sort of already half lost because England would have already required a record run chase. I think they would have needed to get 280 or something in order to win that game. So they were already going to be really, really tested. And have to really put on a top-class performance with the bat in order to win that game. To some extent, the bowlers were culpable at Canterbury as well. Whereas I think in this series, it has been mainly the batting that's failed. So that's what I'd say. What do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely, it feels quite hard to compare them really, especially having watched one of them entirely live and one of them entirely on TV, and your perspective is always slightly influenced by what you're watching on TV and what the commentators are saying. I do think that the fact that Canterbury was a particular low point, and we haven't had that particular low point, and we have seen a bit of fight from England. But on the other hand, if the result winds up being the same, then they still didn't bring home the Ashes. So it's disappointing, but I guess not unexpected.
It's a case of how catastrophic the defeat is, and who gets blamed, because obviously they needed somebody to blame last time, and they blamed Mark Robinson. I think that this time they've kind of been saved from that because of the World Cup coming up so quickly.
Yeah, and also by the fact that, of course, there were very few English journalists down there, so that and in fact, practically absolutely no English journalists that weren't actually really there to do TV and radio.
Yeah.
Of course, the way this works, for the benefit of you guys out there, is that you get paid so little for written journalism that effectively the only way you can fund a trip, unless you want to do it, and make a loss, is to be working on the TV. So unless you're working on the TV, you can't realistically go and cover these Ashes series anything like what you might call a salary. So it winds up with these series. And it's happened in spades this time, that the only people covering it are people that are either working on radio or TV, or people that are living in Australia.
Yeah.
So we've had little attention's been paid to it comparatively by the English media, and I think that England have lucked out a bit there because the big guns haven't been gunning for them.
Yeah, and obviously just practically with all of the matches happening overnight, that makes it harder if you're in England to try and cover it, because you have to do what we did and just lose sleep. So there's that as well. Okay, let's move on, Sid. We're moving on from the Ashes. Now we've got to focus on the World Cup.
Yep.
And that's the case really for the England camp. And we have had now the England World Cup squad announcement this week. Probably no big surprises. Maybe like a couple of sort of headlines would be Emma Lamb's been included, which is really interesting. Do you want to talk about that? Are they going to open with her?
I think that after throwing her in for that third ODI, they really had to include her in the squad for the World Cup in New Zealand. Can you imagine if they included her in that third ODI? She got a 3-ball duck, and then they go okay, bye, see you in the summer. That would have been so unfair.
Yeah, it would.
And
absolutely.
they didn't do that. And she's deserved an opportunity there. Yeah. I think it's not the ideal opportunity that you'd give to somebody, because obviously going into a World Cup is a different kind of pressure, and ideally you'd have bedded her in a series against one of the weaker countries perhaps, and given her more opportunities going forward. But I'm sure she'll take it. You take your opportunity where it comes, right?
Yeah.
And I would expect her to play in the opening games of the World Cup.
At the top of the order?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So I think that's the decision it looks like they're going to make. I don't see why they wouldn't do that. But prepare to be surprised, I guess.
Okay, so that was one of the headlines.
The other thing people talked about a lot on Twitter was Sarah Glenn not going. But it turned out there was more to that, wasn't it, Raf?
Yeah. So England basically sort of admitted that she had been offered one of the reserve spots. So each team has they can take up to 3 reserves, and those 3 reserves will have to go through quarantine, and then will basically not be able to play in the tournament unless there is an injury or kind of COVID, and then you can swap people in, but you have to then commit to them being in the squad for the rest of the tournament. So you can't just kind of swap people in and out. So, I mean, obviously those, those reserve spots are not going to be particularly attractive, because effectively you're having to go through exactly the same kind of privations as the rest of the team, exactly the same quarantine, with it being really, really unlikely that you're going to get a game. So Sarah Glenn was apparently offered one of England's 2 reserve spots. They've decided to take 2 reserves. And she said no, which is fair enough. She's trying to protect her mental health, isn't she, Sid?
Yeah, and it's going to be a tough experience, isn't it, Raf?
Yeah.
Because where are England now? They've flown to New Zealand. What's happening now? I guess they're out on the field training and running up and down.
No. And this is something that apparently the squads were hoping that there was going to be a little bit of a less strict quarantine, and that after the first couple of days they would be let out and actually be able to train in very supervised conditions, and not your kind of normal, we'll just walk over to the ground and get some hitting in the nets going on. It would have been obviously very controlled, and that's what's happened on previous tours of New Zealand during the pandemic. That the quarantine hasn't been totally harsh, but they've said no. They've actually said that the teams will now be in quarantine for 10 days and they won't be able to leave their rooms to train. So it's going to be very, very harsh quarantine. And the reason for that is because when you've got that many teams doing quarantine simultaneously, the New Zealand kind of cricketing authorities simply don't have the resources or the space to give everyone the opportunity to leave their hotel rooms and go to the grounds and do the training and then come back. So if you've only got 2 teams, if it's a bilateral series, well, only 1 team at that point, then it's much easier to manage.
Yeah, the logistics series.
Yeah, whereas if you've got, what would it be, 6 teams, because India are already there. If you've got 6 teams doing it, then trying to juggle them all is going to be next to impossible, and you have to do it so that it was stringently fair. Otherwise, that would not be a kind of a proper way to conduct a world tournament. So that's the situation. So that's what England are currently doing at the moment, and it is going to be very tough for them. I do think it's really interesting though that India are going to avoid that. I mean, because they've already done their quarantine. And I think they possibly were able to train during their quarantine. But anyway, because they've got this bilateral series that's currently going on with New Zealand as a sort of warm-up to the World Cup, they're going to be much more in tune with the conditions and just in much better condition to go into the World Cup right from the off and be really all cylinders firing. Whereas I think some of the other teams are going to struggle with that because they're only going to have been a few days out of quarantine. So I think it's a really big opportunity for India, isn't it?
Well, it might be, Raf. So that brings us on to our final topic of the week.
Yeah.
And finally, in the immortal words of Trevor McDonald. And finally, India in New Zealand. They're already playing matches, as you've said. Now, we discussed this over breakfast earlier in the week, Raf. And what did you say would happen?
I said that India would win.
And what did I say would happen?
You said that New Zealand would win.
And what happened in the 1 T20, Raf?
New Zealand won.
And what happened in the first ODI, Raf?
New Zealand won.
Well, there we go.
Can I just say, in my defence, that I said this before we learned that Smriti Mandana was going to remain in quarantine for possibly the duration of the series, which she certainly hasn't been able to play in the 2 matches that have taken place so far. So can I say that in my defence?
No, Raf, I'm going to cut that bit.
That's not fair.
Anyway.
Okay, let's wrap things up. Thank you so much for your support over the last 100 episodes. We've enjoyed making them most of the time. We hope you've enjoyed watching and listening. If you've got any particular highlights, any stupid jokes of Sid's that you remember, any favourite episodes, then do comment and let us know. We really love hearing your comments. If you're on YouTube, then click like, click subscribe to our channel. That really helps us. And if you're listening to this, because you can get it as a podcast only now, if you're listening, then do subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform or on multiple platforms. It's all helpful to us, and we like to know that people are listening as well.
Yeah.
So keep supporting
Thanks so
us.
much for your support. We're really grateful for it. We're doing this for love, and it means a lot to us that people do actually watch this, and to see the viewers click up, and so it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.